Thank you. My colleagues have dealt with all the questions variably. I think there is one that wanted details. I think Rachel wanted details of the meeting with defense and security chiefs. I think the national coordinator has given quite an explicit explanation to why we held the meeting. This is part of the routine of the robust nature of the response. We consult with them because the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about not only a health challenge to our country and our people, but also socio-economic issues, and those issues have a tendency of impacting on security concerns in the country. You recall that during the lockdown, a lot of issues of domestic violence, particularly gender-related ones, were quite obvious. We also discussed the issues of compliance and the need for those things to be taken seriously. And that ties down to the question asked by Juliana as to whether the task force would not consider enforcement of the use of face masks. That is obviously within the jurisdiction of the states, the subnationals and the Federal Capital Territory administration, because they are the ones that have instituted the mobile courts in their various jurisdictions. And they have also signed quarantine laws and given specific executive orders and instructions that have been gazetted in the various states as to the enforcement. When there was an infraction here at the Jabi Mall, it was the task force of the Federal Capital Territory that did the prosecution and secured the conviction of the people that were charged with the management of the Jabi Mall, and when the sentence or the penalties were handed down, it went to them. So there is a structure of operation, and that is why the presidential task force at the national level does not have the capacity of enforcement. And that's why we collaborate and work in synergy and in sync with the sub-nationalities to ensure that these things are enforced. Because enforcement is a very, very important part of the process in which we are. And that informed part of the discussions that we had with the security chiefs and defense chiefs this morning. Just to reiterate the need for them to support the national response now that we are easing down and relaxing the processes of the lockdown, that we should not take that for granted, and they have a responsibility. And we also discuss issues of the narratives that are out there that we need to work on and ensure that we address areas of concern that have been raised by the public. So it's an information sharing process, and eventually we came to some certain agreement and consensus about how to proceed. They would also look at the entire response as it concerns their operational guidelines, particularly the military, the police, the security agents, so that at least we maintain an effective response to COVID-19 as the processes of the ease of lockdown and the opening up of several areas within the business sectors to come on stream. Because the entire response has always been informed and guided by trying to secure a balance between lives and livelihood. And in doing that, a lot of things must be taken into consideration and factored into the eventual decisions that will come. We've just started the second phase, and it's good that we are on the same page in dealing with the issues. Don't forget, we have removed the restriction on interstate travel that comes with its own challenges, because what you are doing basically is that you are opening up the country, and there must be in place certain infrastructure, particularly security infrastructure, to deal with other phases of challenges that might not be COVID related. Because don't forget, we are dealing with insurgency, we are dealing with banditry, we are dealing with so many other things in addition to the health challenges that have been posed by COVID-19. Whether I will advise the president on another lockdown. Well, that's a very difficult question. But if experience is anything to go by, looking at what is happening globally, the conclusion I almost reached in paragraph 3 of my statement was to emphasize the fact that relaxation was cautiously taken by government to balance lives and livelihood, and that we should not allow the experiences of 1918 during the Spanish flu repeat itself. And what happened in 1918 is very, very simple. During the Spanish flu of 1918, it lasted for 2 years and in 3 waves. And during that period of time, 500 million people were infected by the Spanish flu, out of which they recorded fatalities of about 50 million persons. But the dangerous phase of the flu was the second phase. Why was it dangerous? Because people were so angry about the quarantine and restrictions. When governments then of the different nationalities lifted up or relaxed, people jumped onto the streets and began to enjoy themselves with reckless abandon. And by the time the second wave came, it accounted for tens of millions of the deaths that were recorded during that period, until they had the third phase and the flu eased up as a result of vaccines and other things that were put in place. And that brings me to the point of caution, that we have to be extremely careful how we proceed and how we react and how we deal with the phase in which we are now. We are yet to peak, and you heard Dr. Sani say that and Chukwe, that probably we'll be peaking in September. What that presupposes is that we are still in the thick of the war. And nobody should take it for granted, because government has relaxed the lockdown to take it for liberty that COVID-19 has gone. COVID-19 has not relaxed. It's still virulent, it's still dangerous, and even more potent now from the studies that are coming out. When we started as a task force and we were looking at the way the virus was behaving, you gave people the chance of exhibiting symptoms within the period of 1 to 14 days, isn't it? It's not so now. All you hear is that somebody is sick. The next thing you hear is that that person has passed on. So it means that even the period of time that you expect that the virus will manifest itself and symptoms begin to show, it's rather shortened. by what we are seeing. I know medically, those of them that are experts in this can attest to that. I'm saying this to drive home the point that COVID-19 has not relaxed. Government might have relaxed the lockdown to allow for balance of lives and livelihood and to restart the economy, because the negative impact on the economy as projected by the World Bank and the IMF is that we will end up adding another 5 million before the end of the year or by the end of the year to our poverty bracket. And by the time we are said and done, their projections is that about 96 million Nigerians will be living in abject poverty or in deep poverty. That's a scary figure. So government had to balance this to see. But we expect that we will receive every form of support and cooperation from the citizens. Because now it's a collective responsibility. It's an individual responsibility. It's also a collective responsibility. The government will do its own part, but the citizens too have a major role to play. How would the citizens key in? Very simple. No vaccine, no cure in sight. The projection is that we would expect a vaccine to show up probably in the next 12 to 18 months. And before then, we must take every step as a responsible people and as a responsible government to ensure that we reduce drastically the rate of infections in the community. When we are able to do that, those that will be infected are taken out of the community and into isolation, or if eventually we decide that because of the numbers we now have to in place house management, they'll be taken to management and eventually cared for as bona fide citizens of this country. The only fighting opportunity we have as a people and as a country is to take to heart the non-pharmaceutical interventions that have been prescribed. And that is working all over the world. Stay at home if you have to. I had the privilege of speaking to the Christian community yesterday at the interdenominational service, and I told them that we must avoid instances of reckless confidence, as I've seen being exhibited. Stay at home if you have to, because it's scriptural. And I quoted scriptures of the Bible that enjoins people to stay at home when there is danger ahead. It is only a fool that will see danger and go ahead and plunge himself into that danger. That's it. Observe social distancing if you have to go out. Don't congregate in large numbers. Practice basic hygiene of washing of hands or sanitizing of hands. And add to reach respiratory exercises of breathing in and breathing out, so that you can practice that for your lungs and maintain a healthy oxygen percentage in your system. It is important that we know that and we drive it home. Now, back to the question as to whether we would advise Mr. President to consider another lockdown. I've said it here that lockdowns might not be popular now. But what would happen in the preceding weeks would determine. Madagascar has imposed a lockdown. in spite of its herbal cure. They have imposed a lockdown. About 39 states in the U.S., because of the Thanksgiving holiday and the National Day celebration, their National Day celebration on the 4th of June, they have begun to see spikes in their figures in the different states. And the speed with which they were considering the ease of lockdown, a lot of states have slowed down in proceeding further. Like I said in my address this afternoon or this evening, a province of Galicia in the Catalonia province of Spain have locked down a specific area that has about 70,000 residents. Even in China, where the virus even started, about 2 weeks ago, I think, in the communities around Wuhan, there were specific lockdowns. Dr. Sani just said, we have now isolated 11 local governments. We started with 20, but the dynamics of the figures that keep jumping every week turn around those statistics. And now there are about 11 local governments that we have advised the subnationalities to consider precision lockdown in these areas. I believe as the days and weeks ahead would present, I would not be speculative as to what would happen in the future, but we will do everything within our mandate to ensure the safety and the protection of the well-being of the people of Nigeria. If that will require a recommendation of a lockdown, this task force will not shy away from its responsibilities. We will take that decision. We will make our recommendations to Mr. President, who will finally decide. But we will first take a decision on our side as members of this task force within the context of the mandate that has been given to us and make that recommendation. But I said, such a decision being taken now or advised now will be speculative. What would happen in the next 2 to 3 weeks would determine what eventually our recommendation shall be. I close by urging us to do everything possible to stay safe, to protect ourselves, to protect our loved ones, to protect our families, to protect our community, and in the overall interest of each and every Nigerian, to protect the entirety of our country and its citizens. Thank you and good evening.